A thief will mostly come with a weapon and tell you to surrender your life or money. Now, that weapon is a religious book, and after you surrender your life, you will also surrender your money as offerings and tithes.
Hot take, what if all of the good guys in the Bible were actually the bad guys because the book was written by the bad guys? This is the fun story time retelling of Marilyn Stone's book, When God Was a Woman, that documents the actual history. Let's talk about the ancient origins of the broligarchy. For 25,000 years, people worshipped the goddess in matriarchal societies. Women were in power until the racist, sexist, colonizing bro clan decided to make a ruckus. They would go around in their little boats to these matriarchal cities and just wipe people out and steal all their stuff, including their religions. So the way they justified going to a place that wasn't theirs and putting themselves in power is they would rewrite the religious stories and just swap out the name of the goddess for their own bro clan man god. And there's really good evidence that they just impostered their way into Hebrew culture that later became the stories of the Bible. So remember, matriarchal societies were about taking care of everyone. It was inclusive, it was communal. And bro clan was all about, I want to be in power, I want all the best stuff, I don't want to work, I want everyone else to work for me. Because man, God says I'm better. So in the Bible,
Last time I told you that the ANC betrayed the revolution. Now let me tell you who helped them do it. It was the church. Christianity was the first colonizer. Before the gun, before the chains, the Bible came first. And today it is still here, not liberating minds but sedating them. South Africa is 84% Christian. The country is drowning in poverty, crime and inequality. I think with that much religion you'd have heaven on earth. But no, pastors drive Mercs while their followers fast for blessings. Churches are businesses. And prayer, well, that has become propaganda. Wait for heaven whilst your children starve? Yeah. And the same church that once said apartheid was God's will now sells miracle oils for 50 rand. Black people still kneeling to a white Jesus whilst white billionaires own their land. Ladies and gentlemen, on my humanist walk through Africa, from Limpopo to Ethiopia, I will prove this. From Catholic cathedrals to rural crusades, I'll show you how religion still colonizes the African soul. If you don't know what the humanist walk is, watch the previous video, 1st of July.
People broke the earth. White people, not all of you individually, but the systems you built, the empires you enforced, the profit you prioritized over life. You broke the earth. You didn't just show up and settle. You came with guns, greed, and God. You took land that wasn't yours, spilled blood on sacred ground, and called it destiny. You clear-cut forests, enslaved people, dug holes in the earth for gold, turned the sky into a smokestack, and renamed the destruction growth. You made the land yours by force. You made water something to sell. You made civilization mean white skin, private property, and concrete. You told the world that nature was wild, that people who honored it were savages, and that domination was salvation. And when the earth cried out, when her lungs burned and her rivers turned black, you didn't stop. You invented new ways to profit from collapse. Now you want to fix it? Now you want to lead the way? No, you are not the solution. You are the crisis. But this story doesn't end with you, because the earth is not dead, not defeated. It is wounded, but it remembers. It remembers those who loved it before you fenced it off, and mined its soul. It remembers the songs sung to rivers, the hands that planted with gratitude, the fire keepers, the medicine carriers, the people who knew the earth was not a thing, but a living relative. We remember too. We remember that your empires are fragile, that your borders are fake, that your wealth is stolen, and that your time is running out. The earth can be healed, but not by white saviors, not by carbon offsets, not by policies written in boardrooms. Healing will come through justice, through land back, through reparations, through abolition, through the return of what was stolen, and the dismantling of what never should have existed. The earth isn't dying, it's remembering, and it will only heal when white power ends. Cope. White people.
The solution is not to take Africans and move them to Europe. The solution is to free Africa from certain Europeans who exploit it and allow these people to live off what they have. This is called the CFA franc, a colonial currency that France prints for 14 African nations, and by virtue of which it exploits the resources of this nation. This is a child working in a gold mine in Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso is one of the poorest nations in the world. For Burkina Faso, which has gold, France prints colonial currency. In return, it demands that 50% of everything Burkina Faso exports ends up in the coffers of the French treasury. The gold that this child crawls into a tunnel to extract mostly ends up in the coffers of the French state.
The same people who have the audacity to tell us that we are poor countries. They are taking trillions out of Africa every year. And what is the African doing? Like an obedient, programmed black man, we just give in. And then one might say, why is it that African leaders haven't done anything about this deplorable situation? Well, let me tell you, my brother and sister, they have tried. Documented to this day, 22 coups where leaders were assassinated. The first 7, when they decided they were pulling out of the CFA and that they're going to print their own money, they were assassinated. Every time an African leader has tried to do what's best for their country, they were assassinated. Majority of them aided by France, who felt that when there was a natural resource discovered in one country, they wanted to create a coup. So while the country is thrown into a civil war, they're siphoning the natural resource.
History of America is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. It starts in the colonies of what would become the United States. Let's remember, during the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking, right? Because they think whiteness is real, right? But whiteness was created. Europeans didn't call themselves white. We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other. Before we figured out there were other people to kill, we just killed each other, right? I mean, that was the history of Europe. The English hated the Irish, right? Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody, and everybody hated their ass right back, right? There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count, that's why. And so rich folks looked around, the ones that owned all the land, you know, in the colonies, the colonial elite looked around and they realized something, that they were heavily outnumbered by African enslaved folks, by European indentured servants who were just one level above a slave, or other Europeans who weren't technically indentured servants, but they were still peasants, didn't have any money, didn't have any land, and they could do the math. They added it up and they were like, damn, we got to figure out a way to split these folks apart from one another or they're going to rise up and take our stuff, right? Because after a while, these black folks who were enslaved Africans and these quote unquote white folks who were poor Europeans are going to figure out they're all getting played by these rich people, right? So ultimately the rich figure out they got to come up with some way to get somebody in that group on their team. The easiest thing is to get the poor Europeans, right? Because at least they look like you. They sort of share some of the customs and the culture. So they all of a sudden create this thing called whiteness and they say, now you're part of the club. Now we're going to let you testify in court, enter into contracts, vote, at least if you're a man, own a little bit of land, at least if you're a man, right? And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude. No more of that, because you're too good for that. And we're going to take the white men, now called white men, and put them on the slave patrol to keep black people in line. Give them a horse and a gun and a badge and make them feel big and powerful, right? They're still poor. They still don't have anything. They didn't pay the slave patrol well, right? Just exploited them, used them as a buffer between the elite and the other poor folks, particularly poor folks of color. And pretty soon the rebellions that occasionally happened where black and white got together to overthrow the elite, those stopped because the divide and conquer had begun to work, right? You could turn people against each other by telling those poor white folks, they got to keep these black people in line. And so that divide and conquer gets initiated in the colonies. Rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. Fast forward to the Civil War era. And you have, I'm from the South, right? My people, the elite in my part of the country, right, actually announced that the reason they wanted to break away from the Union and possibly go to war with their brothers and sisters to the North was in order to maintain slavery and white supremacy. They said that at the time. We lie about it now. And we say it had nothing to do with that. But of course, at the time, they didn't have any shame about it, so they just said it openly. Right? The vice president of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, said that the cornerstone of the new government was the great truth that the Negro was not the equal of the white man. So that's the reason the Confederacy was formed and existed. But here's the trick. If I'm rich and I want to go to war to protect my ownership in other human beings, my property, but you're poor and you don't own any enslaved people, why the hell would you go fight to protect my stuff? Because I'm a rich person. I'm not going to fight. Rich people don't go to war, right? Rich people get poor people to go to war for them, whether it's in 1860 or whether it's during the 1960s or whether it's today, right? Rich folks get doctors to write notes for them that say that they have heel spurs and that's why they can't go to Vietnam. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, you can Google that shit because he's sitting in the White House right now, right? Oh, I can't go fight. I have heel spurs. Send some poor kids to do that for me, please, right? So that's been a long-standing tradition. So the rich have to figure out a way to convince the poor to go fight for them. But that's a hard thing. That's like a hard sell, right? Like how the hell, why would you do that? Why would you go fight to protect my property rights when you don't own anything? The only way you would do it is if that rich person comes to you and says, hey, listen, you gotta go fight because we gotta maintain our way of life because if these people get free, they're gonna take your jobs. No, fool, they already got your job. That's how it works, right? Because if I'm white and I got to charge you $1 a day to work on the farm, but you can get a black person to do it for nothing because you own them, guess who got the job? Free got the job, right? So in a sense, poor white folks would have been better off joining with black folks to overthrow the slave system. That would have raised the wage floor of all working people. But they got tricked by rich white men telling them that their enemies were black and brown. Fast forward to the 1930s. And you have white labor leaders. They're not even the elite, right? The labor leaders are not the elite, but they're the elite within the labor movement. And even they had fallen for it at this point. So they didn't want to integrate their unions. And they would say things like, well, we can't have black people and Mexicans and Chinese folks in our unions because if we do that, it's going to reduce the professionalism of our craft. We have to maintain the integrity of our profession. No, fool, you need more people in the damn union is what you need. And if you don't let those folks in, guess what happens when you go out on strike? Who is the boss going to use to replace you? They're going to replace you with the very same black and brown folks that you didn't want to work next to, right? And so at the end of and then you're going to blame them for taking your job rather than the white rich dude for giving it to them, right? Divide and conquer. telling not rich white folks that their enemies are black and brown. And now we fast forward to the president. We got the president of the United States becoming president on the basis of that same rhetoric.
When white people came to Africa, they came showing themselves as superior to the black people, digging out things that black people taught them. You know, what we don't have in our history books is that the civilization we have in Europe today was brought to us by black people. Even black people don't know that. Even many black people don't know that. They don't know that the Moors, they were West Africans and North Africans and Central Africans that came to Europe and ruled Spain. They brought civilization to us. They showed us how to use soap, how to be clean, how to behave like a decent human being, you know. All these things we didn't know that before the Moors brought civilization to Spain. Did you know that the Moors ruled in Spain for 700 years? Where is that in our history books? It's nowhere to be found. Because why? If you are giving black people that power of having once ruled over white people, wouldn't black people start like kind of questioning, oh, we were once at that point of having such a power in a white man's country over white people, and where are we now? So of course they have to hide that history from you people, because knowing your true history is knowing your true power, and knowing your true power means you will break out from that system of racism.
As far as I'm concerned, since we met you people 500 years ago, look at us. We've given everything. You are still taking. It's true. I mean, where would the whole Western world be without Africa? Our cocoa, our timber, our gold, our diamonds, our platinum, our whatever. Everything you are is us. I am not saying it, it's a fact. And in return for all of this, what have we got? Nothing. Anti-personnel indoctrination against ourselves. If you go and cook your horrible diseases like AIDS, you say it is us. You brought us tuberculosis. We didn't have this big cough until white people came here. In exchange for Africa giving Europe 500 solid years of our people, I mean not Europe, the Western world, of our human beings to work your canes, to dig your gold, to take in gold itself, diamond, I mean, you know, fish, peanuts, palm oil, everything. In exchange for that, we have got nothing. Nothing. And you know it. Nothing. And you look upon, you know, so white folks look upon us like monkeys. It is true. It's in your literature. Hey, you know, some of your best thinkers have said this about us. Have you heard of all these Germans? Have you heard? Okay. Yes. They said, Lord Burton, people like that, they said, we don't even have the brain of animals. That's what we've got from you people.
But don't you think that this is over now?
Over where? Is it over? Is it over? Is it over?
We are the monsters you made.
Since we met you people 500 years ago, look at us. We've given everything. You are still taking. In exchange for that, we have got nothing. Nothing. And you know it.
But don't you think that this is over now?
Over where? Is it over?